Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the show. I am Chester C. Busby III, and this is TFT, Tinfoil Talk Babies. And we're sitting here on a Sunday, going to have ourselves a conversation about psychokinesis, or psychic abilities, or esperiling, or whatever you want to call it. It's going to be pretty interesting. It's a pretty deep conversation, very broad one, which you guys know we like to do here. Open it up so we can have everybody talk about anything they want. And this is certainly one of those subjects. But happy to have you guys here, of course. Definitely check out our links down below and check them out, particularly one on Fanspeak over on Facebook. That community is pretty fun, and we hope you guys can go and enjoy that. Also, of course, we'd love for you to hit that share button. We are live streamers after all, and that's what really helps us out the most. And of course, hitting that sub button, like button, bell button, notification button, and all the other buttons that YouTube demands that you have up and hopefully you guys don't get flagged for liking the wrong thing because I know something I've been seeing recently coming out of YouTube is I get this little thing pop up, little buttons you have to click, and then sometimes you have to choose the right pictures to make sure you're not a robot. So I went and checked, why is this, where is this coming from, YouTube? And it says, well, I have looked at something or searched something that is against the guidelines of YouTube. And I'm like, oh, what could that possibly be? Well, it happened today, and I was checking out psychic stuff. And I don't know. I guess I'm just a wrong thinker, YouTube. But that's the
They
way
are
it is.
also going through channels and posting coronavirus links
Yeah,
like they were doing with NASA.
yeah. They did it on ours. They put the
Oh,
WHO on ours. Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. No, and we've seen them do that before many times, especially here on TFT, because our subjects are inappropriate, I guess. They will put little links down below to make sure you get the right information, as if anyone's going to trust the WHO after this nonsense they pulled with frickin' China. The good thing I could say, even though America is extremely political, the CDC seems to be pretty straightforward, and we're seeing a lot of people, governments, starting to shift toward the CDC's opinion away from the WHO here in Japan as well. They were even talking about it on the news the other day. So that's a good thing. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that crap. We're here to talk about psionics, baby, and it's going to be awesome. So let me come over here and see who we got with us on the panel today to dive into this. First, we have a guest we haven't seen since Walt Disney, which was probably one of our best streams, I think. We got Timothy Lim. How you doing, sir?
I am doing well. Are you having a fantastic Sunday? I sure am.
I am, dude. It's a beautiful sunny day. I got a cup of hot coffee and with a bunch of friends, and my beautiful wife is sitting here next to me, very quietly. So I'm good, man. Very good.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's actually kind of gloomy here in Texas, but it was nice and sunny yesterday. So the weather's been kind of temperate, but it was a good day to just kind of sit in and do some work.
Well, you have soothing bunny rabbits around you to make things better. I have a little miniature schnauzer who likes to bark at people. He doesn't like humans. So
That's okay. The rabbits tend to like people, and I have one right here by my feet, so I'm very comfy right now.
there you go. hmm I had myself a couple rabbits when I was a kid. Probably never told you the story before, but we went on every year. My family would take a vacation down to the South, where my dad was from, down in Alabama, and came back after that Christmas break. And my auntie had to tell us that my rabbits were dead. And I'm like, what?
No,
Yeah, I know it was horrible. And of course, what we had done was let her babysit them. And what she did was just put them out in the rabbit coops instead of keeping them in the house because they were house rabbits. And the next
right?
door neighbor's dog got into them. And I was just traumatized.
Aw.
Never had rabbit sense, dude. No.
That's a very common story in the South, apparently.
Yeah,
But just for people's knowledge, I guess you can house train rabbits
you
like they're
can.
like cats.
Yeah,
We've done it successfully with 5 of them. They're free roaming rabbits, so that each of them has like a part of the house that's their territory. And the only reason that's the case is because they're all males, and the males are territorial, which means that you typically can't put 2 males together in adulthood without them kind of tearing at each other, Watership Down style. So
sure.
just for people's knowledge, they think it's an urban legend, but no, it's completely true. You can potty train a rabbit. You can domesticate them, and if they're like mine, they're pretty chill. They just hang out and eat and sleep all day.
That's pretty much what animals do. They got the racket down, dude. But anyway, very nice to have you in here against him. It's always nice talking to you, dude. But we got a couple other panelists here with us. Of course, we have ourselves Model 3. How you doing, Model?
Right. I'm doing great. How are you doing tonight?
I'm wonderful, dude. I'm having a great day. I'm all ready
Can
too.
you do it to make a sandwich?
Can I make a sandwich? I can make a really good sandwich. What do you mean?
We'll train a rabbit to make a sandwich.
Oh boy, that would be nice.
I wish. No, I have not had that success yet.
You probably could do it with a monkey, but the problem is they throw their poo. I don't think I want that sandwich. Yeah.
They don't wash their hands either.
They don't. They're horrible. They're horrible monkeys. But anyway, very nice to have you here, model. And of course, oh, here we go. Let me just stretch out and I got to limberize myself. All right, here we go. Here we go. All right. We are flying down a plane, ragged, volcanic lava spilling out on to the ground from great deep underworld realms, spewing into the air, but standing like a glow, like a beacon in the distance, lightning striking from his nostrils and blasting out of his ears. The one who judges the unworthy, it is Thundero.
It is me, yes, very much so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thundero is here,
That was a good one.
and that was a fantastic.
Thank
I
you.
liked the lava part.
Thank
I
you.
liked all of it.
Yeah.
Just all of it was good. It was
Trying to
great times.
create a cinematic vision, you know. Sorry, Tim. That's something that's been going on for a while. I try to outdo myself by introducing the Thundero, and you know.
I know how it is. I've
It's
listened to
not,
enough
not
of these.
really fair.
Okay, it's not really fair. Model says. All
No
right.
such thing as fair. There's only what's right. What he
Yeah, but
does with me is right. It's
it's
correct.
true. But dude, you are Model 3. He is Thundero.
That's
I mean, come on, get a better name.
That's a good point.
It is fair. Fair. It's fair. Anyway, as you guys know, we're going to be talking about psychokinesis here. Let me come over to the chat and say hi. But as I'm doing that, because we're only going to have Tim for a little bit here, and before I get into my primer and stuff, Tim, why don't you just give some of your general thoughts on what do you think about psychokinesis or just psychic abilities in general?
I've always been interested in psychic abilities because my major in college was actually psychology, and I'm more interested in the aspects of psychology that deal with almost esoteric subjects. So, like obviously, I like Jungian psychology because he talked a lot about the archetypes and things of that nature, the collective subconscious or unconscious. But one of the things that really fascinated me was sort of the white papers on psychic studies, things such as the various types of kinesis, psychokinesis, pyrokinesis, telepathy, clairvoyance, that type of thing, and kind of the studies that they've done involving things like Zener cards, for example, and seeing where that research lies. And the reason why I think that this topic in particular is going to be interesting is because a lot of people, I would say the general public, can at least entertain the idea of clairvoyance or telepathy, the idea, because we've all had something very similar to it, where it's kind of like you're talking to a friend and you both finish your sentences at kind of a weird junction where it's almost like you're reading each other's minds, or whenever you have like a woman's intuition kicks in and it turns out like their baby was in danger or something like that. So that's very plausible in the minds of the public. But telekinesis, anything that involves the mental use to change the physical world, that is a harder pill to swallow for a lot of people, even though we all have an idea of it. So I'm very curious to see what y'all have to say, because this is the one subject that I don't think I've touched on as much as the others.
Yeah, well, to talk about the first part of it, the mental aspects, clairvoyance and stuff, the idea that you can feel someone looking at you. They've done tests
Right.
on this, shown that well, you do, because our electrified body, our actual conscious essence, extends way beyond our body. This isn't some kind of fantasy. This is science fact. Matter of fact, quantum entanglement kind of pulls up a lot of these concepts in that actual theory. But yeah, no, it is pretty interesting to look at the scientific aspect of it. And we're gonna try to cover as much as we can with that. Let me look at the chat real quick. And hello, Slick. Always nice to have you, dude. We get jalapeno milk, which is one of my favorite, and he says yellow. I don't know why, but I feel threatened. But okay. Rodwell Stevens is here. He says, hola. Well, hola to you. Got Roger Heller, of course. Very nice man. Curious TA says, Chester, I picked up a critical Obake. I came on. I came, okay? Sharp. I'm making it scary sharp. I don't know what that means, dude. God, you people confuse me. Bullet says Galaxy Rangers hunt us down, search the universe, town by town, armed with phasers, blaster pistols, try to take our psycho crystals, psycho crystals. Once again, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Bullet. All right, here we go. Dave is going to confuse me as well, I am sure. He says psychokinesis and psychotic nephews. Well, that's a little different. Bullet says, just stay on Earth. I don't come around no more. Forget about, oh, he's doing, these are lyrics. All right, fine. Lone Star Viper. Hello. Wow. He's still going on lyrics. Bullet is just singing a song over here. Nick C says, I'm reading Chester's mind, and it is not pretty. Hold on a second. Nick C says, Bristler's first show was epic. He played the video games and dropped F bombs. I can tell you. Okay, well, I'm glad he did it. He's been threatening to do it, so good on him. Marsupial Gamer, another really. These guys have so much better names than I do, Tim. I'm just Chester C. Busby the Third. I mean, come on. God.
Did you see that illustration that Matt Weldon drew of you? Of course you did, because that was the fan edition, right?
Mhm.
And he drew you like a boss. Like it
He
was the
did.
best thing ever.
It
No one's
was.
gonna mess with Chester if you use that as your avatar.
True. That's true. That was pretty cool. He took the Randy Orton body and threw my head on. Is what he did. Uh,
It looked so good. I saw that on
yeah,
Twitter and I was like, bruh.
yeah, it's badass, dude. It is badass. But anyway, and of course Nick C says Chester, stop thinking about Kristen Crook. Filthy, dude. I shall never stop thinking about Chris. Oh, my wife's here. Hi, baby. I love you. Okay. All right. Well, spooky action in a distance. All right. I caught up to the chat. I will come back and hey, it's Rags. Hey, there you go. Let's come back over here to this side and then let's say hello to Slick. How you doing, Slick?
Yeah, I'm all right. What's up with Kristen Crook? I mean, is that
She's a
just one of those things
hottie.
you keep
That's
in your
what's up with her.
head canon?
She's a hottie. What do you want, dude?
She was messed up in that weird sex cult, wasn't
Oh,
she?
they're all messed up, dude. They're all Hollywood and their Key of Solomon. Go look that up, and such. They're all messed in the head, dude. But that doesn't change the fact that that is a pure drop dead hottie. I mean, Tim can even
Yeah,
agree with me on this. Come on, Tim. I mean,
she is all right.
Kristen Kirk.
I don't know who that is.
Huh?
I don't know who that is.
That's Lana Lang from Smallville.
Oh, so now I know what Slick is talking about, the lady in the sex cult.
Yeah, well, she was caught up in that. Yeah. But Richard, what was his name? Richard, who's the big Virgin Records guy? Richard something.
Branson.
Branson. Yeah, he was caught up in that too.
Well,
But
I do agree with you when you bring up sex cult. It's like, but everyone in Hollywood is part of some cult, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's
How
pretty
different
crazy.
is that?
Yeah, it is crazy. But anyway, all right. Let me drop my primer, and you guys kind of go with the flow here because I got myself a little bit of a long one. But if you got something to interject, just come on in. I'm going to be, keep that in my head and waiting for you guys to do that. But let me go ahead and share screen with you guys. You can see what I'm talking about, and let's get into it, man. Let's get into it. All right, there we go. And all right, here we go. Sweet. So, psychokinesis. Hmm. Now, psychokinesis, of course, is a generalized word. A lot of people would simply say psychic ability or psychics or what have you. And of course, we all know well about it. And it's kind of interesting what Tim had said earlier because there's so many movies and so many ideas of psychic things in our world. Just think of comic books and anime movies, what have you. There's so many of them that love the premise of it. But if you bring up the concept of it to people, they just kind of clear their throat and ignore you. Right? It's very fascinating to the fact that we're so happy to consume it, but yet we have no interest in listening to it. Now, of course, the study of such activities called parapsychology. It is the study of alleged psychic phenomena and other paranormal normal claims, etc., etc. I do love the word alleged in this situation. Because every time you see any kind of parapsychology, psychic phenomena, what have you, even if you get into the world of ghosts and all the other things we talk about here on TFT, they always have this kind of looking down, automatically killing the idea that a conversation can even take place because they use the word alleged. right? And this is a very normal thing you work into. But like I said, we all love these kind of concepts. This right here is one of my favorite psychic things of all time, and of course that is the Akira, which is a great anime. Another one I really enjoyed was a couple of these other movies here. We got Scanners, we got Elfen Lied, which is one of my favorite actually. Stranger Things as well. We are going to touch on the Montauk thing a little bit later, I am sure, with Model 3. And do keep in mind, it is generally accepted that Stranger Things is a Montauk Project story. Right. And some go so far as to saying it's based on a true story. I don't know anything about that, but it is clearly based on the Montauk stuff, which we'll get into later. But of course, the point that I want to make here in the beginning is this: that psychic abilities is really just the modern word for magic, right? And we've been talking about the abilities of the mind and the powers of God and all these other things since the inception of human reality, right? And so it's nothing new. We've turned our gods into superheroes these days and magic into psychic ability. So that's just the modern take on things. And I think we all accept and understand that. But when we get into the concept that magic and psionics are no different, then we have to take into the conversation, therefore, we have to think about deities, religion, even something like this. Now, I think most of us would agree that the Eastern religions deal with psychic ability more directly than the Western ones do. Of course, this is the image of Buddha. And do keep in mind that in Buddhism itself and many of the Eastern religions, Buddha is not a god, right? They don't worship a god. The concept in Buddhism is that if you lead a good enough life and you become enlightened enough, you can become a Buddha yourself. And he was a man, a flawed man, who finished his journey during his last lifetime because they believe in reincarnation, and he became just another Buddha. And of course, a lot of the yogis of the East preach and teach these kind of things, and they get into all of these various concepts. And of course, when the point I'm trying to get to here is the fact that a lot of times you can't even have this conversation. You can't talk to people about psychic abilities because the modern Western concept, which we see all over the world now, right? The concept of America is everywhere. And you can't talk about these things in modern times because it's just science fiction, it's just fantasy, it's just myth. And the modern mind is closed to the concept of these things. And of course, it comes down to what is your paradigm, right? And in order for you to understand or have a real conversations about these things, you need to change your paradigm or, have a paradigm shift. Now, if we're talking about paradigm shifts and we're talking about enlightenment, well, we need to understand what is enlightenment. Now, some people would say that enlightenment is the idea that you somehow, over years of study and the opening of your mind, have gained an understanding of a mystical, universal truth. Well, I would suggest to you that maybe possibly enlightenment is simply the understanding that universal truths or secrets are real. Maybe that's what enlightenment really is. But this conversation is very hard to have because most people really don't want to hear it. They just want us to joke and goof on about it, which was what we do here. But I would say to you that there is more to this conversation than simply the humor that can come out of it. The problem, of course, we get is that there's so many scammers, right? So much nonsense. Here's a perfect example. You're a Yeller, right? This guy's a stage magician. He's been duping people for years and years and years, right? We have fortune tellers. How much money has people dumped into fortune tellers? And it's all a scam. It's people because here's the thing, and a lot of you understand this when I say this. If your mind is quick, and if you're a type of person who comprehends everything you hear, and you've filled your mind with knowledge, the average person is so easily duped, it's comically and scarily true, right? And these fortune tellers are masters of these kind of things. Once again, scam artists, right? Are all of them? Who knows? But a lot of them are. How about psychic surgery, particularly over in the East here? Philippines is just an absolute enormous market of psychic surgery. It's complete bunk. It's bull, right? It's a lie, right? And it's been proven many times over. Then does that mean that people cannot heal with the mind? Well, think about all those examples of people who are in the hospital for some extreme form of cancer, and they're certainly going to die, and they keep praying to God, praying to God, praying to God, and then all of a sudden the cancer's completely gone. The doctors are baffled. What's happened? How did this happen? What's going on? Was it misdiagnosed? And then they start second guessing themselves. Now, of course, did God heal them? Oh, maybe. Or maybe the power of suggestion, the power of the mind had something to do with it, right? And of course, you have other people like this James Randi. Of course, he still has his $1 million psychic challenge. If you can go and prove you have psychic ability, he will give you $1 million. And this guy has been debunking for decades and decades. And he's a stage magician that just kind of got sick of all the lies, and he's been pumping on this. But yet, no one has come forward and claimed it. Interesting, right? And then, of course, if we get even deeper, because I've touched on religion here a little bit, what about the concept of Jesus and Muhammad and Allah and all those kind of things as far as the Western world is concerned, as far as gods? Like for instance, what about the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the tomb? Right? This is a well-known story, but of course, if you read the historical text and you go back and you look at the original version of that story, what it says is that the character who was at that time Horace, actually, he didn't raise Lazarus from the dead as the Bible says. He laid Damuzi upon the table, and lights and whirling and buzzing sounds and all kind of things took place, and then he raised from the dead. Interesting how stories can be convoluted, and this is just adding to the problem that talking about psionic abilities is very difficult because there is so much bunk around it, and there is so much storytelling. We have other things like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. This is certainly part of this conversation because the whole damn all these story in the tablets is talking about how the god Thoth is trying to teach you how to open your mind and travel astrally, which of course is psychic ability. What about all the people who say they have outer body experiences or near death experiences? And scientists try to say, oh well, your brain's dying in their light and right? But why are they so consistent? It's very interesting, and it's once again a psychic experience, right? But then if you take into account that how we see reality, and you try to understand the brain, because this comes right down to the brain, right? And if you understand how we see reality, it starts maybe to put things together a little bit, because here is what reality really looks like. Yeah. Your brain, your eyes, your ears, everything takes the information into the back of your brain, and it takes all the little things you've known and learned, and it creates an image, right? And therefore it creates a colorful image, and therefore that brings us to the understanding that what I consider purple and what you consider purple and what he considers purple, they are not the same. But we all agree it's purple because the way the human brain works on the other side of it is the fact that you don't know what you don't know. There is no such thing as going from A to C. There's always a gradual step in between because your brain cannot conceptualize something that it does not know, right? And all of these things, and as you can see, this is an enormous subject, right? But I wanted to give a little bit of an anecdotal story of my own, just as an aside. When I was a young man, high school kid, I used to work at a pet store. Loved it. Favorite job I ever had in my life. Too bad it only paid like $5.50 an hour. But I loved it. Loved working there. Loved the people. It was an amazing thing. But behind the counter, they had a stereo, and they had speakers up running through the place. And they had this nice, soothing classical music that was horribly boring. And every time I walked by it, the channel would change. Every time. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't had anything to do with it. But it could become such a problem that the owners wouldn't let me walk in that area, right? Because every time I went by the damn thing, it changed. Now, is this an example of psychic ability, or is this something about my electrical field that was reaching out to this radio because it's absolute disgust for this freaking classical music that I hated and I wanted to hear some freaking AC/DC? I don't know. I don't know. But it's true. There's no exaggeration in the story I just told you. It's exactly true. Every time I went by that stereo, it changed to the point that the owners would not let me walk in that area. That's how real it was, right? And I think it's just something to do with my electrical body was interfering with that particular analog machine. But it is what it is. Is it a psychic thing or is it something else? And then, of course, that brings in the conversation of what is reality, right? And that's where we get into conversations of reality is a simulation. And does that come into the conversation? It might. Right now, there's a couple other things, of course, will probably come up today, and I put them up here just so we could have them covered. Of course, Montauk is a big one. We know this is kind of a proven one too. The CIA and the government, we're doing various psychic experimentations, mind control, Manchurian Candidate, all that kind of stuff, all over America and Canada, by the way. Mount Montauk was certainly one of them. There's several movies that are based upon Montauk. Of course, The Men Who Stare at Goats, Stranger Things, etc., etc. So this is a real place that has real history. We have the general concept of psychic ability use in the day-to-day, which I'm sure will come up. And of course, we have another very, very interesting conversation about DMT, right? And the psychic visions one can gain, and the consistent psychic visions one can gain from taking DMT. And I don't know how deep people want to get into that conversation, but we'll see where they take it. Whew. Well, I think I covered a lot
So
of that.
strap in for a 6-hour TFT.
That's right. Strap the hell in, baby. All right. And the good thing is, it's a day off for me. It's a red letter holiday here in Japan, so I have nothing scheduled.
Uh-oh.
For the next, if you do a talk on DMT, you should talk to John Della Rose. He's actually done it before, and he told me some freaky stories about it.
I knew it. I knew he was a druggie this whole time. I knew
There
it.
you go. He knew it. Yeah, we should get John in though. I mean, if he has that experience, that might be fire to talk about. And of course, what I just did was I opened up a conversation to anything you want to talk about, and I've also possibly opened up further TFT shows because I think we could do a whole show on DMT. We could do a whole show on Montauk. We could do a whole show on frauds and charlatans like Uri Geller. We could get into religious and psychic magic, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things we could get into. But today I just kind of want to leave the floor open to talk about whatever we would like.
I have, if you want me to, this is where I'm coming from. So when I was doing my undergrad in psychology, one of the things I had to do, it wasn't a thesis because it wasn't a master's level degree, but what it was we had to basically do like a senior presentation on something that could be potentially a master's level topic. And you touched on this in the very beginning when you mentioned how there's that word allegedly. And I've heard on your previous tinfoil talks that science is absolutely kind of its own cult. There are gatekeepers in it. They like to say that they're objective and that they're just here to try and get the facts. But I know working at academia, that's not true. Everyone has an implicit bias. And depending on what the current paradigm is, a lot of people are very resistant to new ideas. So one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to look in the literature of scientific experiments that were done looking at parapsychology, and I wanted to kind of filter them out and point out the ones that have validity, because not only are they objectively difficult for science to explain, but they're objectively recorded, measured, and repeated to the point where they have some validity that merits worth looking at. So 3 that I have in mind off the top of my head, the one that's the most common and I think is most interesting, anyone in the chat can look this up. There have been several studies that have been done on it. They're very fascinating. They're called Gansfield experiments. And at the university I was at, we actually had the apparatus to do it. So the way the Gansfield experiment works is that if you've ever heard of sensory deprivation, it's kind of the same thing, quite not to the same extent as you probably know from like floating chambers and stuff. But basically you would have a subject and they would be in like a red room, and they would be basically in this kind of sleep state where they would have like half-cut ping pong balls over their eyes, and you would play either white noise or pink noise in their ears while they were kind of in this relaxed state. And meanwhile, in the room adjacent to them, or at least in the same building, you would have the transmitter. You would have a person who would be focusing on a target and kind of talking out loud and saying and describing what they're looking at. And then the third person, the observer, whether that be the psychologist, psychiatrist, or just the scientific person, would be recording what was happening. And then after the sleep stage was over, they would ask the participant to choose between a set of targets. And obviously, most of them would be decoys, actually all of them except one. And the one would be the actual one that was the focus. And what's interesting about the Gansfeld experiment is that it actually had statistical significance.
Mhm.
Now, people might not know what statistical significance is. That's just a fancy way of saying, out of all the possible trials you can run on an experiment, how much leeway do you have by numbers to the point where you have something that is viable and that kind of shows or demonstrates that which you're trying to prove? For example, if you have a placebo versus a pill for a cure for something, if you have, let's say, 100 test subjects and let's say 80 out of 100 were cured, that's definitely statistically significant. It means that these were cures that happened that were possibly more than likely due to the pill as opposed to something random or healing on themselves. So in the Gansfeld experiment, it's been very statistically significant. It's been repeated many times, and I think that the current high score for it, I use that terminology, it's not really what we call it. It was actually conducted in 2010, where they had over 1,500 subjects participating, and their success rate was 34%. Now,
Yeah.
that sounds like a very low number,
Oh no, that's huge.
but if your rate of statistical significance is like, let's say, 20%, you beat the statistical significance by 14%, which is big.
Yeah.
And so the study is trying to basically demonstrate that any type of lucid dreaming where the mind is kind of free to wander can potentially work to a form of clairvoyance. So that's one of the objective examples. Another one, because my wife and I both work in medicine, you were talking about miracles. There's actually a medical term for a miracle. It's called spontaneous remission. It's typically done in context with cancer, because cancer tends to be a death sentence for a lot of people, especially when you approach like stage 4. But when a cancer just heals on its own with no type of chemotherapy or anything attached to it, it just goes away. They call it spontaneous remission, because you can't just write down in your notes that it's a miracle. That tends to lose its credence when people talk about it. So that's another one that happens in the medical field. And then finally, the last one that I mentioned, it's actually something that's historically documented that is very fascinating. It was everywhere when it happened in the news, was what happened in 1963 with a Buddhist monk named Thich Quang Duc. And you might know him because of the various articles that covered it. But this was the monk who self-immolated himself to protest the Vietnam War. He took gasoline, a fellow monk doused him, and there were reporters everywhere, and the guy burned himself alive. He didn't even scream while he was being immolated. He just got reduced to ash. Interestingly enough, the last thing to remain of him was his heart. His heart did not burn. It was the only thing not reduced to ash, and it was venerated for many years as a relic. And there's huge articles written about him and the whole occurrence because it was so well documented. But that was one of those occurrences of like mind over matter, where these monks from the East, in kind of a way that Hollywood has had a fascination with, he had such good control over his body from a mental perspective that, I mean, heck, I don't know about you, but if I was burned alive, I would not be sitting in kind of a lotus stance. I would be screaming and panicking, telling someone to stop the pain or whatever. So there are these occurrences that have good documentation. It's not necessarily just in the realm of Hollywood or fantasy stories. There are kind of these astonishing tales of the unknown and the supernatural that we currently can't explain scientifically, but the scientific evidence is there, and I think it's worth pursuing.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. You were talking about placebo earlier, and it made me think of the arrhythmia experiments with aspirin, and
Right.
the absolute near 100% placebo effect, right?
Yeah, where they just
Uh,
heal themselves,
yeah,
just because they thought it
yeah.
was aspirin, and it wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I get you, and it is fascinating when you get into that. And of course, the interesting thing is, Tim, because you and I both come from the academic world, but you and I both know inside that world. Now, I'm coming from the historical anthropological one, where you're more from the medical, but still, there's no difference in the fact that nobody will talk about that, not openly
Yeah.
anyway.
No, they won't, because part of it is shame. They're just too scared that they're going to be embarrassed or laughed at. And that's part of the thing that I never understood. One thing that is fascinating about any scientific inquiry is it's all about trial and error. So even a subject that I might not like, such as, let's say, global warming, right? I might not personally believe it, but it's like, no, throw as much studies my way. Try to convince me. Like, it's your job to try and persuade me that the data and the evidence that you have can actually verify or can support your claim. Same thing with like the flat earth theory. I hear a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who laugh at it, and they do so because it's the idea that everyone knows that the earth is round. But then my question to them, just playing devil's advocate, is, well, can you prove it? And 9 out of 10 of my friends cannot. They're like, well, you just know the earth is round. It's like, well, that's my point. It's the point of scientific study that you almost have to put on your poker face and just be like, okay, I need to hear this out. Why do you think the earth is flat? Tell me. And honestly, I think in this day and age, just, in the current year that we're living in, I've encountered more flat earth theorists who have a better grasp of their side of the argument than the accepted model of like a globe earth. Regardless of how I might personally feel about it, I will tell you that it's very hard to debate a lot of flat earth people simply because they did their homework.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And the flat Earth thing, there's clearly a mistake in the mathematics. As
Correct.
far as what you can see with the curvature of the Earth and how far you can see is bunk. Now, why is that? Is it simply a mistake that is stuck around for hundreds of years, or at least dozens of years, or is there some reason it's being that this false math has been put out? Because that's what the flat Earthers are grasping onto. They know that there is a mistake. Now, I would say that that doesn't mean you have to jump to the concept that the Earth is flat. That wouldn't be where
Right.
my mind would go first, at least as far as Occam's razor is concerned. But yeah, flat Earth is fascinating.
Yeah, and it just means that you have to recalibrate your data, where it's like, instead of just telling this person who believes in the flat Earth, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist. No, explain to him why the math doesn't line up. And then that's the beauty of scientific method, is that you should be able to test, repeat, test again. You should have repeatability between different experimenters. And then if there's something not lining up right, you go back to your numbers and you try to explain for that, account for it. And in that way, the new data presents itself, and then you have a new set of variables to work with.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Now, Marsupial Gamer here, he's got a couple of interesting points, a little pushback, which is awesome. He says spontaneous combustion has been scientifically explained. I have seen what you're talking about, and that is interesting stuff. He also continues to say, it says that critical evaluation of the Gansfeld has revealed no evidence for psi, no plausible mechanism, or omitted replication failures. Okay. And then he says, I love the flat earth arguments of gravity and magnetism hasn't been explained when they very much have. Yeah, no, the flat earth is a very deep conversation. We got into twice here in TFT, and both times YouTube put their little things up there telling people, here, there's the truth, and they sent people over to give us a hard time too. So that just makes me think there is more to it, Marsupial. But what do you think? I say out of all that, the only one that really is for you to answer is the critical evaluations of Gansfeld has revealed no evidence for psi ability. What do you think about that?
No, I think that that's a valid criticism, just based on. I think the biggest the biggest pushback against it is that part of experiment is the idea of a multiple choice, where you have various targets, and it's like, one of these things is going to be the right answer. So how much of it is based on the ability of a person to correctly guess versus like accurate or concrete psi ability? So I think he's referring to a 2013 pushback against the most recent experiment, which was conducted in 2010. So I think that that argument or that pushback is valid. And again, I would go back to the parapsychologists or psychologists who conducted the experiment and say, you need to account for this, because if there's going to be if there's a flaw in your methodology, then I think that's something that you need to explain. And that's one thing that I had pointed out as well, is that I always thought that was funny, that it's like, okay, now you have a multiple choice test. Which one is it? Now,
Right.
of course, they're saying that the statistical significance is, even with choice as a factor, it's still higher than the success rate if they had not undergone the Gansfeld test. But again, that's that is a valid criticism of it.
Well, yeah, and but this conversation also comes straight over into remote viewing as well, because remote viewing is there's so much information on this about all the tests the CIA has done, and we have several of the doctors, the actual physicists and such, who were involved in those experiments, who out and speak. Publicly all the time about these things, and they're of the mind that everybody can do remote viewing. They don't think it's a special thing at all. It's completely mundane, actually. And when they do their test and teach you how to do it, and then they do their actual, accuracy, you're seeing anything from 30 to 70% accuracy, which is way, way above what would be expected just as randomness, which is what you've been talking about. So even something is most people would just dismiss immediately as remote viewing seems to have a lot of data behind it showing that there's something going on there.
Right. And the other thing, too, to kind of join the pushback against the Gansfeld thing, delving a little bit into just general parapsychology, you have this idea of instruments being used for the purpose of which they were designed. For example, in ghost hunting, one of the things that people will have is they would have very sensitive thermometers. And the idea is that, when you detect that the temperature in the room drops, let's say 10 degrees, and it gets cold, that is evidence of the supernatural. That's evidence that there's like a ghost there. And the scientific, I guess, pushback or argument to it is, well, you can't say that because the thermometer was used to gauge temperature difference. It was not used to gauge the presence of a ghost, right? So, when you play with the strict rules of scientific methodology, there are things like that where it's basically like a foul. And in the sense of the Gansfeld experiment, it's like, well, so you have this guessing game that you have going on, but is that an actual accurate measurement of psi, or is it just something that you can correlate to it? And again, that's just food for thought, because I can't think of any concrete experiment that actually does, measure psi ability directly. But what you can tell that what we're trying to do is come as close as we can.
That's true, and of course, although it's been modernized, I think a lot of people here have seen Ghostbusters, and if you recall, the Ghostbusters kind of starts, other than the library beginning, when we first see Venkman, what is he doing? He's doing a mind reading with the cards, right?
Yes,
Yep.
Zender
Uh,
cards.
and of course, these days they've come with blinking images, and it's become more advanced. But you can teach someone to get a very high ratio of success by doing that. And therefore, the question is, how are you training someone to do such a thing? And it brings us into the idea. I think, for me, what I think it is that not only does your electrical body touch beyond you, therefore it comes into the quantum entanglement of all reality. I personally think that all reality is quantumly entangled, meaning that this planet and some planet that is 55 galaxies away, I think it's all connected. And you'd say, well, that's a crazy concept. And I would say, well, not really. Even Einstein and his particle physics theories kind of touch on the concept that that is actually the truth. The fact that particles can be in two places at the same time kind of shows us that there is a oneness to everything, that things are not separated. I mean, you are not an individual, you are part of a collective thing that you interact with. And now that might be a strange concept, but I think it ties in directly to the concept of psychic ability. And once again, I would note what I mentioned earlier when we know, and this studies have been done on this, if you're standing and you're staring at someone from the back, they will feel it. This has been documented as accurate. How are they feeling that? Well, it's because your field is interacting with their field. I'm just proposing that maybe the fields are far bigger than they have conservatively stated. Did any of
Yeah,
that
it's all
make
very,
sense? Was that clear?
it's all very fascinating. I'm actually going to dip out, but I'm going to join in the chat. I need to get back to work doing my pages, but I'd love to
Awesome.
hear what the other people on the panel have to say about it. But thank you for having me on, Chester.
Always welcome, dude. Happy to have you, Tim.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks. Later.
Shit, Tim.
All right, guys. Well, whew. Goodness gracious. I'm a bit tired, Thundero. Speak for a while, please. Thundero, just leaving me hang. My wife. I just said I'm tired of talking, and my wife, if you didn't hear her, she said she doubts it. Uh-huh. This is the support I got over here, right?
Um, um, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. How about you, model? You got something to add to this? I know you want to talk about Montauk. Is there some reason why I'm not hearing them? I'm hearing Slick, but I don't hear those guys.
Oh, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, okay, okay.
The you know, the my understanding of Montauk, I think, is a little bit off of what we're doing. There's some that ties in,
Absolutely, there's a
but in
lot that
general,
ties in. Yeah.
we've talked about some of this in the past in other subjects. I tend to think I look at the brain in general, and even going past the brain to the other parts of the body, like the nervous system. There's very close parallels with computers, personal computers, and even some of the functions of the body. Like, I have you ever been knocked out?
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah, I've been knocked out twice. I got choked out once, and I got knocked out in a match. And it's when you come out of it, it's a very bizarre feeling. It's I liken it to like when your computer just reboots. It
Mm,
just all of a sudden boom, it just loads up. And if you look at the brain as an infant, it's almost like when you bring home a new computer, and it's if you turn it on and it's looking there and it's got lights and it can make some noises, but until you start actually providing some environment and some data to it, it doesn't even begin to function.
hmm
What I've always thought of the brain, that the brain is, I I tend to think that the brain it's a processor, but with a small amount of memory, and that there's constantly data being fed to us, no matter, if it's like, and in the parallel that I would draw to our other shows is when we discussed how, uh my kind of thought on some type of Wi-Fi that's tuned in directly to the brain,
hmm
that is either capable of carrying these things like intuition, or like you say, when you can feel someone looking at you, or even the soul when it leaves the body. Because if you've ever seen someone pass at that moment, something leaves. And it's a very unnerving thing to actually see somebody die.
Yeah, it is.
And so I've always thought that I almost think that we're capable of it, because the subject of, you know psychic activity and things like that, it's so deeply entrenched in culture, as far as literature, and even modern pop culture, that there's something to it. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if we may be fully capable of it, but we're lacking like a firmware upgrade that allows us to actually get down to it.
Mm,
Because if there is like this Wi-Fi thing, that data that's tuned completely to us, where information is traveling back and forth, that opens up a lot of possibilities for some pretty cool stuff.
hmm
And when you talk about levels of intelligence, and how some people, like, you have a Tesla, which I think everybody agrees that Nikola Tesla he was on a different level of thinking.
Yeah.
So he wasn't performing magic. I've said it before. I don't believe in magic. I believe that there's a fundamental to everything. But I do think that, possibly this iteration of ourselves doesn't have that firmware upgrade that allows us to take advantage. Now, everybody's heard at some point that, oh, we only use 10% of our brain, but that's pretty much been debunked.
Well, and that's not even what they meant anyway. At any
Yeah,
given time,
right.
everyone leaves
But
that
of
out.
brain capacity,
Yeah.
there's only so much you can do. The human brain actually cannot multitask. When people say multitask, they're talking about is switching very quickly from one activity to another. You cannot The human brain can't think of two things at one time. And actually, you cannot think when you hear a loud noise. So if there's one stimulus at a time that can be processed. Now you can hear a loud noise and immediately go, "Oh, I got to be on guard," but you cannot resolve information at the same time.
Yeah. No, that's it. And you're touching a little bit on the Akashic record,
Hmm. Absolutely.
which
So,
is
and
pretty
like
interesting.
the the Montauk, the CIA, the MK Ultra stuff is kind of attributed to Montauk, but it even goes back. It goes back further, right into the 40s after World War II. So you have Project Rainbow, and then you have Project Phoenix. So Project Phoenix was the Philadelphia, or Project Rainbow was the Philadelphia experiment. Phoenix was the Montauk experiment,
Mhm.
and they're linked because, like you and Tim were talking about, it's so hard with some of this stuff because there's a lot of charlatans,
Yeah.
but then I think there's also a lot of intentional disinformation
Yeah.
that's thrown in. So if you have, let's say, it'd be so simple to do this with any of these. We call them conspiracies or kind of questionable sciences. That if they're really trying to do something, say in Montauk in Manhattan. They're working on a project that's either weapons or something like that. And they want to throw people off the track. All they have to do is throw out this crazy story. And I don't know if many of the listeners actually know the story of the Philadelphia experiment in Montauk. It's pretty fantastic, and it's pretty well documented as far as the making a ship invisible and making things dematerialize and disappear.
Yeah, well, and
So
that's of course connected to the Stargate project as well with Montauk, right? And it's interesting. Stargate is not what you think it is. It's not about going to other worlds. That of course was the inception after the war of remote viewing, and a lot of people after the war is a very important thing to keep in mind here because a lot of things happened after the war, and a lot of people attribute that to the Cold War that started up between America and the Soviet Union. But now that we know, with the wall falling, that there was never a threat, and there's a good possibility that all that was that stress and competition was set up and completely nonsense. Now it brings me to a conversation: well, why, after the war, did we get so deep into these things if there really wasn't an actual threat from Russia? What was the point?
yeah, and you have a period of time there after World War II through the 50s where there was a massive amount of research being done on psychotropic drugs, on remote viewing, uh, all these kind of paranormal things, and it's very strange that time period that
It
all that
is.
happened.
It is very strange. Yeah, the 40s, late 40s, early 50s was an
Hmm.
absolutely insane period going on with what government projects and stuff. It
You know,
absolutely
you
was.
think of poodle skirts and Studebakers and stuff like that, and all these government agencies they have people in rooms trying
Yeah,
to guess what's in envelopes. I mean, it's really
yeah.
strange.
It is, and because they did all kind of crazy things, dude. Even stuff like just the simplicity of the sarin gas studies, right? And
On
what
the
they did to
syphilis
those people.
studies,
Yeah,
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 the insane stuff that was going on in the government, and uh, so anytime you start talking about conspiracy theories, a lot of people just tune out. But it's like, that conspiracy theory has been kind of warped into meaning something that it really doesn't. It's just acknowledging that there's something questionable going on. It's not a crazy wingnut mindset, because we absolutely do know that the government has participated in some
oh yeah.
insane activities.
Absolutely. Montauk's not a joke. It's been we know exactly what they were doing over there. Well, we know what they want us to know was going over there. And like I said, Stranger Things. The reason why I keep mentioning that instead of Scanners or some of the older stuff is because it's a modern topic. People know Stranger Things, but that is based upon the Montauk experiments. That girl, I don't know her name. What's her name? Like 7 or something like that. They gave her a number. But there's a lot of this stuff going on. And keep in mind, I think this is all a good thing, though. Having people questioning conspiracy theories, it's good to question that. Now people can get absorbed in it, which is a bad thing, but keep in mind that with the Western world, we went through what 1200 years of the Catholic Church shutting down all thought, shutting it down, right? And then we had a pushback that only happened because of that Chinese plague that came in. Once again, the Chinese plague coming in, which we call the Black Death, right? And when that came in, that wiped out so many people and took so much of the priests away. That the power of the priests went away because supposedly they're protected by God, right? But because they were trying to help the people, a lot of them died, and the faith in religion dropped horribly, which allowed the Reformation to take place with Luther and all the things that came after that, and the absolute bloodshed that happened after that. But it wasn't until those times that we started seeing those manuscripts and stuff that came out of the Crusades that they found in down in Spain. In Toledo and stuff like that, to be able to actually become to the fore. And a few people died, who were trying to bring this information out, burned at the stake by the Catholic Church, of course. But eventually the Enlightenment came along and we were able to start talking about these things. And little by little, we have got to the point where we can have these conversations fully and openly without any worry of threat. So just keep in mind that this is a good thing and it is a modern thing because the West has been shut down for so long.
Agreed. You really should be able to talk about anything.
You should. But I mean, because all those things I just laid out are facts of our world, and here we are in this modern day. And now the only thing I really don't like about it, and of course, Thunder and Slick, you guys can speak up at any time. The only thing I don't like about it is the fact that what we mentioned right from the beginning model is that the religious body that is science, modern science, is so against religion. And I understand where it's coming from. I just explained where it's coming from, right? But they've become such a religious group themselves that they won't have the conversation. So, in a way, the scientific community has become the church of modern time, and they will not talk about such things. And it's clear that we should be talking about such things. I've told you guys before about my experience with the ghost thing, where I was talking to my mom and on the Skype, and the fact that there was a lady standing there, and I just simply asked, "Oh, who's the lady?" I figured she had a guest, right? And of course, during a conversation, there was no one there. My father couldn't see anyone, and my mother said, "Oh, I see her all the time." Now, what does that mean? Because that's a very truncated explanation, but I saw it very clearly. And I wasn't thinking ghost. I wasn't in a mindset of a ghost. I just simply was asking, "Who's your guest?" And of course, it turned out to be no one. So, what does that mean? Now, for me, that means that I saw something that needs to be researched. We need to have scientists on this, figuring out what's going on, because that was a real experience. It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not, because I know what I saw, and therefore I want to understand it. But we can't have that conversation, just like we can't talk about many other things in the modern world because it's taboo, and this is nonsense.
Well, it's more than just taboo. I mean, it'll destroy your career.
Yep.
It'll get you on watch lists. Like people like oh God, now I'm drawing a blank. The guy that wrote On a Pale Horse, Bill. I can't remember his name now. I know exactly who it is, but yeah, William Cooper. He was outright assassinated by the government.
Yes.
There's no question. So you people that get too much into this stuff, there's weird things that happen.
It is, and it looks like we have ourselves Thundero has come back.
Well, I'm not. I'm in and out. My wife just came home and she wasn't feeling well, so I'm helping her get her some dinner.
Oh,
But
that's nice.
I'm here, but you guys are filling the space, so I don't have much to say.
It's true.
I'd get too cosmic in my own perspective, so and you guys would be saying I'm off in the weeds.
Well, from my perspective I personally have many cases of my own personal psychic phenomena, with whether it be empathy, like extreme empathy. I walk in a room and I just know if there's extreme distress and it's crippling, or premonitions. Sometimes within 30 seconds, sometimes within days. And I'll just know this is exactly what's going to happen. And then I'll sometimes even do, everybody does this, deja vu, but I'll have deja vu about a prediction that I haven't even lived through yet, and then it'll happen. So it's, for me personally, when we talk about psychokinetic stuff, I don't need to believe it. I live it. It happens to me all the time. It's one of the reasons I'm kind of an introverted person. I'm not really, I'm clearly not, but I don't like to be around people because it's overwhelming, especially big groups of people. And things like you're talking about with like otherworldly ghostly experiences, stuff like that, I think that's all psychic phenomena. I think it all is. I don't think the spirit is what we understand as the spirit. I think it's just psychology and psychic phenomena we don't understand yet. That's
I
all
agree.
it is.
Yeah.
And I think when we see ghosts and this stuff and that stuff, all that is it's some form of psychic resonance in that place of a former person or whatever, and it's being just continuously bouncing off, and our brains can interpret it because it's just the same resonance we make every day anyway. So we can see it, dogs can see it, cats can see it, animals can see it, because they have the same similar resonances in their brain, their brain waves, brain energy. It's all the same thing. There's a reason why a lot of extremely haunted places that have been known to be haunted and documented for centuries, some of them, if you go down deep enough, they have certain stones compositions in the ground underneath of them, or they'll have certain crystal formations that have grown in large abundance around them. And there's a lot of people who think that that's what that is, that it's been like absorbed into these minerals, this energy, and it just continuously replays in what appears to be, ghostly activity in that area. Another example is my wife's grandmother's house, their basement. The first time I went down there, everybody in her whole family told me basically to be careful because there's a ghost who likes to push people going down their stairs. And it's happened to multiple different people, and they get a push, and they just either take a tumble or slip up. Stuff like that. I've had personally stuff like that happen to me, and I've also had, like I said, psychic phenomena happen to me. One time, first one that comes to mind, I tell this one all the time. My buddy and I were driving by my parents' old house, and it was at night, but it wasn't really the time of year when deer generally are moving around too much. So for whatever reason, I just looked over at him and I go, I bet you we're going to almost hit a deer. 30 seconds later, we had to veer off the road, everything else. A big old deer just comes running right out in front of us.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff happens to me constantly. I make just these little weird feelings, and it'll just happen. A few minutes later or a few days later, it'll just happen exactly like I thought it would. Now, I could just be I'm just really, really smart, and I just figured it out by the wind pressure in the air or something that night, and my brain was just able to translate that without consciously doing it. Maybe that's all it is. I don't know, but I don't even have to question whether or not this stuff happens, because it happens to me too often for me to be like, nah, it's just coincidence.
Well, you
It
guys
happens all the time.
keep dancing around and not biting on my quantum entanglement bait that I put out.
Well, what do you want? Well, how would you like me to bite into it?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm just kidding. But well, no, because I think it's all connected. I think that quantum entanglement, the science of quantum entanglement, is eventually going to show us exactly what all this is. Because
Yeah.
I do believe that we are interacting with an electrical reality, and that reality, being we are electrical bodies ourselves, is completely connected. And little things like feelings you get, understanding, premonitions, Mike, you give your examples. Here's one of my grandmother. She had these things happen to her many times. She never made a big deal about it, and most of these people don't. If you see someone getting up to talk about how psychic they are and you pay them $35.99, they're bullshit. You know
Yeah,
that,
that's all garbage.
right? But my
There's no
grandmother,
control,
yeah,
and
well,
that's why it's garbage.
that's right. And my grandmother, she had, like, the one I stands out to me the most, is she called down to, because I was actually in the house when this happened. She called down to the docks, and she was asking, where is he? I know he's hurt. Is he got him to the hospital yet? And they're like, huh? Hours later, the boat came in, and my grandfather had had an accident on the boat, and a gaff went right through his leg. She
Yep.
knew he was injured. right? She knew it. And is this just some special psychic ability? No, I don't think so. And especially when you listen to these scientists that have spent a lifetime studying such stuff, and they come out and say these aren't unique things. Everybody can do this because there's some connection going on. And I think that the the science of quantum entanglement is going to show us that that's exactly what it is. We're living within an electrical field. We are not an individual blip within that field. We're just part of the fabric of it, and therefore that is why everything can be communicative and interacted with.
And I'm sure it's being studied for
It sure
what we
it is.
know.
Yeah,
It's definitely being studied, and it would likely be not disclosed to the public as well.
maybe that's possible. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Well, let me see what the chat's got to say with this. Slick is being super quiet. He's either spooked or bored. I don't know.
What do you want me to say?
I want you to say something awesome in that
All
super
right.
sexy
So
voice
here's
you
the
got.
thing. Here's the thing. The universe is a big place,
Mm.
and we're trying to define it with limited tools, both our senses and our instruments. And for our hubris to take over and say that we can see and know everything and how it works and how it interacts and how we interact with it, even our brains and how we perceive time and space, I think is folly. So when a person says that they know one thing or the other, well, that's just their lived experience if we want to go, social justice. But that's true for everybody. Everybody has their own experience. And we can all say that we're living our own construct, our own, our own simulation. But it's obviously an interactive simulation. And how those interactions take place across whatever bandwidths, whatever wavelengths, whatever strings that attach us to one another and to the very, farthest reaches of the universe and galaxies and everything else on the macro and micro. Well, that's something we can talk about and we can postulate about. We can sit there and muse until the cows come home. However, the most important thing is to know that this slice of our existence, this little tiny mote within eternity, there must be a point to it. And I think that point is just to get out alive and move on to the next stage and be a good person. And all this other stuff is just random interference in all of that. But we need to gather information and knowledge so that when we pass through the veil of whatever it is, and the knowledge that we gained before is added to this little bit of slice of time that we've been here. And then as we move on to whatever comes after, and I'm not going to venture a guess as to what that is, that we are of good to the universe or even possibly move out of it to something else. And so when I talk about things like this, sometimes it becomes a little bit more minutia to me in my head.
Awesome.
I don't think there's any question that what we actually understand is just a small, tiny fraction.
No, that's definitely true. And well, basically, what Slick was saying there is very much an Eastern philosophy, right?
Oh
Because the
yeah, I've always
Eastern,
said if I weren't a Mormon, I'd be a Buddhist.
yeah, well, and the mystics of the East, they would say that the idea of the mind, what the Westerner has the concept of the mind, is a minor aspect of what you are. And the fact that your subconscious is so much more powerful and necessary to your soul, your being, than your actual thought. And of course, scientifically, we know this is true. Your subconscious mind is capable of incredible things. It can make calculations at lightning speed, et cetera, et cetera. Your mind, that which is you, is actually very stupid. Your subconscious mind is incredibly intelligent and capable. And how sad is that you cannot access it? Because you would be the world would be so much different if the humans could actually use their subconscious mind effectively. Outside of the dreaming mind, and the Eastern yogis and Buddhist priests and stuff like that, they dwell on this concept quite a bit.
Yes, it's one of those things that I spend a lot of my head space in. When it comes to things like science, I would love to see, great leaps forward. Heck, I would love to be able to go to another solar system, but you know, I have no illusions about the fact that probably I'm going to give up the ghost in this incarnation before anything like that happens. But I look at the universe and I look at the vastness when they make the calculations there. There are more galaxies in the universe than there are stars in our galaxy itself, and there are more stars in our galaxy in itself than there are grains of sand on the Earth. That boggles me, and I think that I have to be an integral cog in whatever that machine is that is universe. And so when I talk about these things and worry about this and who's keeping things from, I mean, we only have a certain amount of time in this life to explore. So take joy in it and try to avoid the pitfalls.
Very good point.
Amen.
Slick's very amen indeed, dude. Slick's being all
absolutely.
like philosophical and stuff. That's awesome, dude.
It's one of the things I tell people very often, because you get these people who lose themselves in drama here, drama there, emotional, blah, 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 blah. Look, you're only going to get one shot at this.
Mhm.
Death's coming, so you better enjoy it while you can,
True.
because
Well,
you
if you
never know
believe in
what
multiple
tomorrow's
lives, you
gonna
might have another shot. But again, I'm not going to
bring. But
venture past that.
it won't be you.
No,
It will
it'll be
be
something
a new
different.
version of the same energy that was you.
Right.
So it won't be this same cognitive creature that is you, that makes you. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you're a piece of crap. I don't know. But most people are pretty all right. So you need to find a way. Like I said the other day for my namaste thing, contentment leads to happiness. You have to find a way to be content with what you have,
Yep.
even if it kind of sucks, even if you're still trying to make it better. But at least get to a point where if you're even in a place that's not great, you're still not miserable, because life's way too short to be miserable. There's no.
Well, we're having fun while we're doing this, so that's the
Sure.
important thing, right?
Well, that's
Yes.
the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to be happy in whatever that
Yes.
form that takes, right? And that's what it comes down to. Because we are not important. Therefore, don't think you are. Don't try to be. Just enjoy the life that you have. I
Correct.
think that's the most wise thing anyone could ever say to you. There's so many people who want to be more than they are. Even those who are in the eye, therefore that would be considered celebrity. They want to go so far beyond what they already have accomplished that they lose sight of simply being happy. I mean, look at all these celebrities and the nonsense they get into, suicides, just layer upon layer of idiocy, man. Just back up. You're not that important. Just enjoy your life, enjoy your friends, and be what you can when you can be. I mean,
Well,
it's
I
that
swear
simple.
there's a culture, well, our culture right now that is obsessed with gaining fame, and fame is ephemeral and fleeting, as it always says,
Sure.
and it's fickle. And if you don't find a rock to hold on to, and I mean that's kind of an emotional rock, somebody or someone or some way of thinking. This life is going to be miserable. You're not going to find happiness. You're going to be angry, and all the wonder that you might see, these things that we're talking about, the possibility of quote unquote magic, the magic of life, the magic of experience. It's going to be lost in you because everything will become drab. There won't be color and vibrancy in anything anymore because you'll be too worried about, too solipsistic in your existence and not broadening things out.
There you
Well,
go, baby. There you
everybody.
go. That's what I want. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right, dude. And this is one of the dangers we've come into, but with the destruction of religion in the West. I mean, your psychic self has been detached from that which is greater than you, and therefore you can take a secondary position. Because here's the reality and the trouble with the West, particularly those who are radically upon what we would call the regressive left. They think their opinion matters. But the simple fact of the matter is anybody can have an opinion, but did you earn it? Right?
Right.
No.
And of course they haven't. That's what the loss of religion has done to us. Now I understand we can have our argument about religion. I understand the negative and pitfall aspects that come with religion. I get it. But there's also some very powerful and useful tools that come with religion, and that is one of them. Putting something before yourself, and the absolute level of entitlement and the just arrogance and hubris coming out of so many people in the West is outrageous. I mean, you must earn an opinion, and no one does that anymore. No one bothers to research. No one bothers to do anything. Even something, a little conversation like we're having today about psychic stuff, which is going into more of the psychic mind than psionics themselves. I bothered to do I bothered to do research on it, which I've done my entire life, but I even went back and freshened myself up. But how many people even bother to do that without opening their damn mouth these days? You must earn the opinion you have. You're not automatically granted one.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
no
true.
one's obligated to hear it either.
No,
I mean,
that's right.
Well, then people get upset because you don't respect the flatulence that seems to seep out of everybody.
That's true.
And why would you? I when I have a jaundiced eye now of everything I see in social media constantly. I constantly say, because I've been caught, I've been caught where I believe something, all of a sudden I'm like, I find out, oh, that was bullshit. Like, the little guy just recently who played like he was a child and, he was bullied. Turns out he's like, a young man. That right there immediately now, and I don't attribute that to psychic abilities. I attribute that to the experience of knowing that there's a lot of bullshit in the world. However, the things that I notice is, I think Thundero talked about this. There are times when I know for a fact, without looking at somebody's face, I don't know if it's their posture. I don't know if I don't know what it is, but I know there's something wrong with them. And I've tried to avoid it in the past when I was younger, being empathetic, because it hurts.
Mm.
and to feel people's pain and to let it in and try to help. Sometimes it's futile. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to be better at that.
Well,
And
one thing I've learned with this, whatever you want to call it, it's not literally everybody, unless they're like a literal sociopath, has the ability to feel empathy. But
Yeah.
some people,
Uh-oh.
and I'm and I'm one of them, have a really strong version of that. That's really all it is. I don't think it's anything magical or mystical. I think just some
Well, and
people
I don't think it is either. I think it might
strong
be just
perception to it. But
interactions.
what I'm saying is that one thing I've learned is that it's useless. It's great that you can, empathize with somebody, and maybe that can lead to something valuable. But for the most part, it really doesn't solve anything. Just because I know that this person's in distress, unless I do something to help them, and it's not my responsibility to help the whole world. Um, so what? You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
what I mean by that is not necessarily like physically, the Good Samaritan, but a kind word goes a long way.
no, I'm
Is what I'm
not
saying.
saying you shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is that empathy is probably the most useless human emotion. It's inert. It doesn't have value one way or the other at all. The only time that it does is when it's coupled with sympathy. And something our culture has lost very quickly in the last 20 years or so is the sympathetic voice. It's just gone. And it's because sympathy is actually a masculine trait. Empathy is a feminine trait. Sympathy is what leads somebody to actually do something about someone's pain. It's not just, oh, I know what you're going through. Yeah, that may make you feel better a little bit to know that somebody else knows what you're going through. But does it fix the problem? Probably not. Because that pain is coming from somewhere if it's emotional distress, right? There's some reason it's happening.
Yeah.
So a sympathetic person is a more masculine trait, and it's basically just it's an active form of empathy. So when I say empathy has basically no value, that's what I mean, because it's nothing without sympathy. It's just
Well, I think that the two. I think you're right. The two work hand in hand, and as you delve into whatever it is that connects us as human beings, and I think that I know I've felt stuff before. I know I have. And people can say, it's all explainable by science because I'm reading body language and all this other stuff. But there have been times when I knew exactly what this person needed. And it's because I opened myself up to whatever it was.
mm-hmm.
All right. And then I said something, and then all of a sudden they're just like, I thank you so much. And I'm like, and this only happens, it's not all the time. Because like the problem is that you take a risk when you involve yourself with somebody you don't know or somebody who you even know, but they may have things that they're dealing with. And when you do this stuff, and you're doing it selflessly as opposed to trying to make a buck off of it, which I think
Hmm.
is where we get charlatanism. And I got to stop for a second because I got a cough.
It's all right.
You're okay. Yeah, there's a lot of charlatans who claim to, they have all these abilities. It's all garbage. Nobody can control it. It's
Except
not.
for Miss Cleo.
Yeah, it's
Except for
not
Miss
something
Cleo.
you can
That
just
is
turn on.
fair.
It's not like when you're doing mathematics, right? You can just kind of turn it on and go through the motions of it. It's not like that. It literally is just the ability to just perceive things that you shouldn't be able to,
Well,
whether that's within a person or within reality.
and you guys have started touch on a topic that I want to end the show with, because we
Hmm.
are getting close to our time. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today is kind of touching on what you guys have been kind of creeping toward, which is the mob, right?
Mm.
And because we see people all the time will be caught up in some kind of mob mentality, mob activity that's going on, and they will do things that they would have never done as an individual. And there's been a lot of talk and scientific look into what causes the mob. How is this a reality? Now, some have gone to the idea of pheromones, but the problem with pheromones is we know so little about it. It's so hard to do any kind of science and actually prove it. And of course, the other aspect of research would be on the psychic mind, the connection we all have, and that brings up conversations of things like when you have large groups of people together concentrating on a singular thing, it tends to have aspects that will change reality. Right, so it
Mm.
seems that the human mind, especially the congregation of minds, can literally have an effect. And of course, the simplest look into this would be the mob mentality itself. And we know the mob mentality is real. We've seen it demonstrated over and over and over again. Even the ancient Romans knew that if they wanted to rule successfully, they had to control the mob, not the individual, not the consciousness, not the culture. The mob itself was the core thing that they needed to manipulate. And we see some absolute masters of manipulating the mob these days, particularly Donald Trump. Donald Trump is very, very good at that. The
Well,
words he chooses and
so is Hitler.
so was Hitler, yes. But Hitler was
Same
amazingly good
guy.
at that. Yeah. But I mean,
I mean,
I'm just
I
saying
think I think this what you're getting to is a pretty good. There is something there, like
there is.
this amorphous blob of psychic energy and whatever mental in the shalt that happens that where people start doing things that they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
You see that at like football games and concerts where it's
Hmm.
usually in a pretty good way, but then you see and when there's a riot or something, people just go crazy, either out of self-preservation or they're just hooked into it. Fear is one of those motivators. You see people do crazy things when they're scared,
Yep.
and uh, and I think we see this all the time in media currently, how they use that kind of mob, um, the manipulation of the mob to scare people so that they can prod them, cattle prod them with
Yep.
certain ideas and topics to go in a certain way. And most people don't have I think, the cognitive awareness to dissect and discern when they're being manipulated. And I think every one of us has probably been manipulated by someone or something at one time.
Sure.
And it's only through the effort of will and I would say some wisdom that we start to conceive the forest for the trees and discern the real image behind the illusion that has been put up. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, but and that's all extremely true. We see extremely primitive version of it with the SJWism, right? It's a very primitive form of mob rule. But for me, my question isn't the acknowledgement of it being true. We know it's true. My question is, how is it true? What's the mechanism for the mob mentality? Because it is a terrifyingly dangerous thing. Because
what causes
you
dogs to go into a frenzy?
Say that again.
Well,
what causes dogs to go into an attack frenzy? Same thing, probably.
Yeah. But do you guys think it's psychic based, or do you think it's pheromonal based? Hold on a second.
I think it might be a combination of multiple factors. I've been to I was at the Rattle and Hum concert with U2, and I have to say it was one of
I'll try not to hold that
craziest.
against you.
I know you probably don't like U2, but it's pretty impressive with all those people there, and there was this thing where everybody was kind of moving in rhythm, and they said, that's rhythmic, but it was this like waves, and it was crazy, and there was a feeling there, and it was a good feeling, at least for me, and I can say that I've been to several times in my life where I've kind of experienced that. I've never been in a riot, so
I
don't know what to say
have.
about that.
I have actually. Speaking of that, I might as well give my experience on it. I was down in New Orleans, and I used to play my saxophone, trying to gain skills and get into clubs, which I got into several. But
Down on Frenchman Street.
yeah, well, Bourbon Street and stuff like that, and Merchant Street and such. But it's it's a good place to get your chops because you're not going to make much money even if you get into the clubs. So you have to really hustle and work your butt. And of course, one of the things I always did when I was a professional musician was I worked as a bouncer, right? Because I could always guaranteed I have a little bit of money coming in, whether the saxophone was getting me money or not. And I was working at a certain establishment, which I will leave unnamed, but it's known for its violence, right? But Mardi Gras was going on, right? And the parades were going by, and the people were just enjoying it, and all of a sudden, this just wave of very negative emotion moved over the crowd. I don't know where it started. I don't know how it started, but it just rippled through the crowd. And we saw people. I saw people just because I was working the door, right? People just automatically get angry out of nowhere. They're sitting there having a good time, enjoying Mardi Gras. The parades are going by. They're getting their moon pies and their necklaces and stuff. You got girls showing their tits. It's wonderful, right? It's a good time. I just get hit in the head by my wife, by the way, but because I mentioned tatas. But nevertheless, just this wave of negative energy just moved across the crowd, and people became very violent out of nowhere. And particularly out in front of the place I was working, like I said, it kind of had a name for being quite a violent place. But it just started this brawl, just ripped off out of nowhere, and all of a sudden I found myself trying to protect the doors of the club from people who had no interest in going in there, but all of a sudden they wanted to go in there, and they were just violent. And I literally, me and the other three guys that were standing in front of that door, just give you an idea how many bouncers were working at that damn place. They had 4 people in the frickin' door instead of 1. We literally we found ourselves in a full-on brawl that lasted a good 15 minutes, dude. Now let me tell you something. I don't know how many of you guys have been in a fight in your life. Now I've been in a bunch of altercations because of my profession, right? But 15 minutes being involved in a fight, 15 minutes long, that's serious business, dude. That is serious business. And so
I've boxed before, and 3 minutes is a long time to keep it up.
It's ridiculous, right? And it just waves and waves of it, and I have no and it goes into this conversation perfectly because I have no idea why that happened, especially because we were in a situation that was fun. People were getting their moon pies. The girls were doing their thing. It was a great, fun, jolly environment. But all of a sudden, somehow, and it seemed to be about 50 or 60 yards away where it started. I don't know how it started, but it just flowed like a wave, and it was just a terrifying experience. And I had to buckle down and just deal with it. But this mob mentality concept it's real. It is absolutely real, and I don't think I think there might be pheromonal aspects to it. I wouldn't be against listening to any kind of scientific experiments on that, but I feel it's psychic, and I think it's part of the fact that we're all connected in good and bad ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, people call it. We have terms like good vibes and bad vibes.
Yeah.
It's there something getting put out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's energy that gets karma. Some people will talk about karma.
Well,
you
humors.
can see a person's energy field with all sorts of different, you know, different scopes and things. They have them now, and there's even videos of people that apparently are manipulating the energy that they're putting out there,
Mm,
whether they're doing it consciously or not. They are doing it and using it to calm other people and to, things like this. So there's definitely something to it where we are in some way connected at a mental level, whether it's only in groups, special connections, like twins, for example. They often know what the other person's
yeah,
experiencing
that's right.
thousands of miles away. They know it.
Mhm,
So
yeah,
there's something there. I mean, that should be physically impossible
yeah. It's
unless
deep.
there's some psionic link between them.
Right, and it's deeper than that too, Thundera, because we have examples of twins who were separated and orphaned and raised. Several examples raised by separate families in different areas of the country. We're talking about America here specifically, and not only did they not know each other existed, but when you look at them, they led the same lives. They did the same things.
Yes.
It is bizarre. Twins is a very good point to bring up. I'm surprised I didn't think about putting it in my primer. Oh well.
But yeah, definitely there is a we've doctored it up and flowered it up over the eons, but basically a spirit takes over in the air is what they would used to call it. There's a
Yeah.
spirit in the air of whatever, melancholy or violence or whatever, of war. And largely I think that's where a lot of our conceptions of like polytheistic gods, like the god of war and this and that, came from, was feeling that. When we get together with a group of relatively like-minded people, we can like feel an energy between us that can cause all kinds of things to happen, whether it be violence or just happiness. Sadness can happen, like all different things can happen, and it happens all over the world, and it's happened too many times for anybody to just be like, nah, that was just coincidence. I mean, people do that, but that's just not an honest take at all. It can't be. So I think a lot of our spirituality, was like I said before, is just psionics, psychology, stuff like that. We just don't understand. We don't have any way of measuring it, or at least not scientifically enough to have a truly good, strong scientific explanation like we do chemistry in the physical universe. But I think we will one day, and I think what you're talking about, quantum entanglement, things like this,
Mm.
quantum mechanics, all of that is rushing to it. And I actually saw earlier today there was a quote, I believe it was from Tesla, where he basically said the moment that science can start actually studying that, the supernatural, the paranormal, metaphysical, something like that, that's when they'll start to make leaps and bounds beyond anything we've ever made before, because that's where the real meat and potatoes of reality is in the energy.
Mhm. Yeah, there you go. And yes, let's see who said that. I'll just go back over real quick. Who was that? Bill from Argos Creation says, "Did they cover the photon double split?" He says double split. He meant to say double slit experiment. Yeah, no, I covered a little bit by simply talking about quantum entanglement, coming from the 1801, I think 1803 experimentations that led us up into modern photon experimentation. But yeah, I touched on it a little bit. But we're kind of beyond that right now. Sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, we're way past that now.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with psychokinetics is it's really hard to find any strong data on like actual kinetic, like telekinesis or anything like that. There've been experiments done here or there, and they've had some mild successes, but there's never been like, we've never had the, I don't know, like Charles Xavier level of person has showed up who could just do amazing things.
Right.
So it's hard to do, but the reality of it is, I think most of what people experience is 100% real, because I've experienced it, and they don't talk about it because they can't quantify it. We don't have the language to quantify it other than spirituality. And most people, especially like modern Americans, unless you're talking about religion, which is what you were talking about, you can't talk about things that broach spirituality because somebody might get offended, and you don't want to
Yeah.
offend them, so you don't talk about it. You just leave it be. Or they'll call you, if they're really zealous, they might call you a heretic or something. So you just leave it alone because it's just not worth the argument.
Or
Um,
the opposite, the scientific person would say you're a lunatic religious person, right? Either
yeah,
way, you're screwed either way. Yeah.
yeah. So people just leave it alone. Like I don't talk about it. As a matter of fact, Booster, who I just seen show up in the chat, I told him about my empathic experiences, and he just basically made fun of me, which I figured he would. But I just don't talk about it with people because people don't understand it. When I find somebody else who's experienced it the way I have, that we instantly know what we're talking about. We can have hour-long conversations about it because we get that, but other people don't get it. That's fine. It is what
Mm.
it is.
It is what it is. That's true. And all right, so we need to move into the last phase so we can keep ourselves on schedule here. But the last phase of today's conversation for me is DMT. And DMT is a very interesting conversation because you got to keep in mind there have been a lot of scientific experiments that have been used for DMT, and of course you have the people of Central and South America, the shamans who've been using it for centuries and centuries, right? And we have other examples of mushrooms and other things like that being used around the world. But DMT is a very powerful and very direct way to tap into the psychic mind, supposedly. But the for me the interesting thing about it is the people who go and have DMT experiences, including the laboratory experimentation, they all see the same thing. It's a communal vision. It's very colorful. They see a serpent, a feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl possibly is the idea where that came from. And the serpent, oddly enough, is the good guy or the good girl, I guess. And there's some evil that is always lingering in the distance, in the background, that the snake is warning about. So my question is DMT something that actually seems to be touching into the psychic mind? And
Mm.
why, therefore, is everyone having the same visions? It's not, their own little trip. When you use DMT, especially in its purest form, they're seeing the same thing over and over and over. And now I can understand that if you're listening to me talk about it and then you go and research it, and then later you do DMT, you are therefore, polluted by the concept, and therefore you can see it. But a lot of these documentations were done long before this was talked about or known about. So, what do you guys think about DMT and these kind of universal vision that it brings?
Um, well, we know that the idea of opening the mind is pretty much about as ancient as humanity itself.
Sure.
I talked about this before, but they've even discovered that chimpanzees this one specific group are seeming to develop an actual religion, which I would assume
Yeah.
the same intent to, open their minds up and experience things. But we know that, like the Eye of Horus, for instance, is pretty much just the pineal gland. It looks basically the exact same. And we know that the Egyptians and the people who came before them were master surgeons doing brain surgery and stuff long before anybody else could have even thought about it, really,
This
from
is
what we
true.
understand. And they had to have known that that was in the brain. I'm sure they dissected a million brains. They probably saw that. So they all the way back. I mean, even back then, they would use incenses and chemicals and things to try and trigger what DMT triggers, a spiritual uh, trip, basically.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's with outside of the realm of possibility that like you said, the serpent, something that's been with humanity since the very beginning of humanity.
Very
Some of
true.
our very first stories are about serpents, good or bad. Every major religion, pretty much ever, has had some form of dragon or serpent within it. So it's very possible that they are seeing some being, some entity that exists that we can't normally see, that maybe is, a dimension or two above us or something. And it just happens to look like a serpent for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and keep in mind the etymology of the word serpent itself.
mm,
It actually, if you follow it back to its earliest beginnings, it means wise or wise person or wisdom, right?
mhm.
And of course, over time, it took the form of a snake, even going back to the caduceus itself, because of these perceptions. A lot of people, especially after the inception of Christianity and the various religions that followed after it, the serpent has been seen as something evil. But do keep in mind, in ancient times, the serpent was seen as something highly holy and highly good. Now, some scientists would say, well, that's simply because they found a lot of antitoxins and stuff by using snake venom. Maybe, but the DNT question now brings that into question, because this universal vision of seeing this serpent who is wholly good and talking to you and warning of evil, it is strange to say the least.
Yes.
I think every adult that has a sound, rational mind and who is responsible should trip balls at least once,
Oh, I agree. No, I agree 100%. I agree.
because it does something to your ability, I think, to cope with things,
Yep,
and also to uh, open your mind to things that you're not used to.
that's true. Now, it's nothing to be abused. Let me just say that right
Of
offhand.
course not. Yeah, of course
Just
not.
like everything else. But I agree 100% with you, because here's the thing. If you go and take yourself a kind of trip, now DMT is a very concentrated type of thing. I'm not talking about LSD. That's we need a lot more experimentation into that. Of course, it got shut down by the government because of their, for whatever reason. I'm sure Model has other reasons, expectations of why that happened. But nevertheless, what taking LSD does, I've never taken DMT, but what it does is it's as if your eyes, and therefore I mean your mind, right, has tape upon it. It's like that kind of clear tape, but it's got a bunch of gunk on it. And when you take it, it's as if you rip that tape off and you see reality clearly for the first time. Now, I'm not talking about hallucinations or any of that kind of crap. I'm just talking about the fact that you can see clearly for the first time, and you can make it as simple, like a pencil, right? Just a little old number two pencil. Have you ever actually looked at it? Have you ever taken time to understand really what a pencil is? Because there's so many things in your reality that you don't ever really bother to think about. It's just an aspect, it's a function, it's a thing, and therefore you never take time to actually look at it. One of the things that LSD does is it allows you to see things for the first time. And I agree wholeheartedly with Model. I think everybody should do that. Not saying that FanSpeak and or any of our subsidiaries would promote any manner of drug use or illegality. Thank you very much, YouTube. Uh,
Well,
but
you don't have to. I mean, the drugs just make it easier. There's ways of inducing that
it's
without
true.
drugs.
It's true.
There's been plenty of experiments with sensory deprivation and
Mhm.
denying yourself sleep. People can lucid dream and do things like that, which is
Yeah.
very similar. There's
Slick talks
ways of doing.
about that with his YouTube experience, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same, though. It's not.
It's
I
not,
mean,
no, but yeah.
I lucid dream. I dream every night. So, and I normally dream all night, every single night. And I was going to talk about sensory depth tanks, because I did it out in Las Vegas one time.
Mhm.
And have you ever done it, Chester?
Sensory deprivation? No, have not. No.
Yeah, Thundaro, have you ever done it?
Not in a tank, but I've done it. Yeah, I've
There,
done it. There's ways of doing it without tanks. Let's put it that way. Put it that way.
yeah, I mean, it's such a bizarre thing. It's basically as close to they can, like a soundproof tank. It's full of very saline water. It's the very high level of salt, which increases the buoyancy.
Mhm.
And your brain really disconnects, and it's a strange feeling. And it takes you a little bit of time to kind of unwind from it, but after about 30 minutes, it's very, very weird experience. If you can ever do it, I highly suggest it.
Yeah.
And there are places where you can go. They don't I think now a lot they've kind of commercialized it a little bit, so they have like these, spaceship looking tanks that have neon lights in them and stuff. But if you can find like a good place, this was back in like maybe 98, 99. And it's a great experience. But the purpose of the water is to take all the tension off your muscles and your joints. And it's just a very, very bizarre. I call it, the best way I could explain it is your brain just really disconnects from the world.
It's
It's
starved, is what it is, right?
Well, you're not getting the tactile feedback from your environment, like feeling your weight. You're not getting the noise coming in, which like we talked about before, how just ambient noise really clouds your thoughts.
Mm, mm.
It makes it hard for you to work on your own thoughts. So there is a very sound foundation in meditation if you can practice it and get good at it. You have to find a quiet place where you can do it, but there's a lot to be learned from it. As far as the psychedelics, in my younger years, I have to admit I did a whole lot of it.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Every weekend. It was every weekend.
Well,
That's
I
what we
didn't
did.
do anything like that much, but I did it enough to understand what it is, and it is something that has value, and it does have value. And it's unfortunate that in DMT, I think, is a much more potent and direct aspect of it, and I'm glad that in other countries it's being performed and used in a very clinical and clean way, which is good, safe way. But unfortunately, in America, because of all of our, Reagan, well, Nancy, and all those things that came before it, these kind of experimentations are kind of off the books, and they really need to go back and relook at things like LSD, because there is value there. There is value.
Well,
Do you know how they actually prepare that? It's really interesting. The ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca is see, I would prefer to go with just a straight DMT, but yes, I do know how it's prepared, and it's going to make you chuck your guts out. But yeah, it's quite an
It's
interesting thing.
interesting how someone was able to figure that out. And that's one of the questions about it. They're like, well, did somebody give this information?
Yeah,
Because, there's a certain type of magnolia bark that this comes from. It's in the
yeah.
magnolia family. But they cook this crap down to a mush, but you have to add another plant to it that actually keeps it either I think it allows the stomach to absorb or it keeps the stomach from it's one of the two.
No, it,
But
it allows the stomach lining to absorb it,
yeah,
and
so if you don't
yeah,
add this random plant, it does nothing. So who figured that out, that you have
yeah,
to take this and do this to it, but you have to add this other plant.
it is
I
bizarre.
guess
Yeah,
trial and error over, 1,000 years, people will figure
well,
stuff
the
out.
shamans did it. That's who did it. I mean, people have been experimenting with psychedelics since people.
Well, I understand that, but at one point there was the first shaman who did it.
Yeah, yeah. They were just playing around trying to get a better high, and if this one does it, and they did it. Um, it's the one of the tragedies of the Christian takeover of spirituality in the West is the loss of the benefits of a pagan mindfulness religion in the West. So, like the Greeks had a very they're still considered pagans technically, and they had a very mindfulness, stoicism, these sorts of things. But yet, but then if you go north into Germania, what would become Germany, there was a lot of shamanism, animism, and they would do and the Greeks did too, do all kinds of stuff to just get mind blasted and have visions and all sorts of stuff, mushrooms and literally poisoning themselves, literally to the brink of death,
yeah,
to try and open up their mind so they could have that vision. Um, we've lost even the ability to broach that, which is to me is the TFT part of this whole thing,
yeah.
is how taboo the idea of psychic phenomena, spiritual phenomena, whatever you want to call it, is in the West has to die. Because I think we've come to a point now where we have a sickness in our society that's so prevalent that there's so many people who are just lost. They have no center. They're just either drifting from nonsense to nonsense, or they're just completely miserable. And they shouldn't be. All of their needs are probably met. They're probably not hungry. They probably have power and heat. It's actually pretty easy to live now
It is.
compared to 100 years ago, and yet people are absolutely miserable. And I think it's a spiritual problem, a psychic problem. We have lost that interconnectedness that even just the old pagan religions had.
Sure.
Spirituality is often, some people even say, all it is just the ability to get with a group of people and have a shared experience beyond a normal conversation. And yeah, we've lost that as our society hugely. And I think one of the best ways to get that back is probably what you guys are talking about. Now, me personally, I'll never do them because I personal oaths that I've taken to people. But
Hmm.
everybody else, have fun. Knock yourself. As long as you're not addicted and ruining your life, I don't care. Do what you want.
Yeah, we're not talking about drug use. We're talking about experience.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a fair point you're making, and we're going to have to come wrap it up here. But because when we're talking about the psychic mind, there are some very subtle and soft aspects of the psychic mind that are everyday things, and no one's going to argue with them. Right. For instance, kind of taking off what Thunder was just talking about, and the absolute breakdown of the Western psyche.
Yes.
Some aspects of it. Let's take debauchery, for instance.
Hmm.
You have so many young people, particularly women, right? They blame men for this, but it's really not what's going on. The women have decided because a certain percentage of them have listened to these crazy feminists from the '60s and decided that they're going to have sex with as many people as they possibly can, a la Tinder, right? And in truth, when you do this, when you go out and have many multiple sexual partners, what it does is it psychically reduces humanity in your eyes, and therefore it makes it very difficult for you to eventually get married and have a prosperous relationship. You're actually hurting yourself by having multiple sexual partners, and it's not the physicality of it. Sex is nothing; it's easy. That's why people get in so much trouble with it, because it's so easy, right? I want to talk about the psychic aspect of sex, and they're hurting themselves, and they don't understand that because they're children and they haven't been protected, they haven't been educated, they have been lied to.
Yes.
This is the reality we live in, and there needs to be some manner of I not people would say psycho cultural shift, but I think there should be a psychic shift in the
Yeah.
West when it comes to these kind of things. But nevertheless, great conversation. What a wonderful conversation today. But I'm going to let everybody here give their final comments, and then we're going to decide what we're going to talk about next week, and then we're going to say bye bye. So while you guys are giving your final comments, I'm going to go over here to the chat and see if anybody has anything intelligible to say. I see boosters over there, so probably not. But let's start with Slick, please, and Model. Um, no, I'll do that later. Let's start with Slick. Go ahead.
All right. Well, this was a very interesting conversation. I did most of the time I was just listening. However, when you do your interactions with people out in the world, realize that you make an effect as you walk through it. Not only with, I guess, what we're talking about, the psychic phenomena or an electromagnetic field, but with your personality, the energy that is you, and do your best to make that energy a positive on people around you, because as you ripple out, it might have an effect to ripple out to others, and we can keep this place from going down into the abyss. Uh, have a great one. Come look at my book, Little Girl Lethal, on Indiegogo if you have the inclination.
Sweet. Thundero?
I'll say this, something I've learned in my life, and it's hard because I actually learned it at a very young age, but as a lot of the young people do, you ignore it, you reject it because you're rebellious or stupid or whatever. But there's something that's absolutely true that pretty much every major religion agrees on. It's not so much that love is powerful, which it is, but it's that hatred is poison.
Mm.
And you have to get it out of you. You have to do, if you're going to resist evil, that's fine. You should resist evil, but don't become evil to do it. I know it's easy. It feels like it's easier to do. It feels good to hate somebody who's evil, who's doing bad things to you or bad things to innocent people, but you can't let yourself. You have to try to find a way to resist their darkness with goodness. So try to do that in your life. And I think that ties into big time what we're talking here, because as Chester was talking about, that mob mentality is real, but it's constant. When you're in a group of people, everybody's been around this person. They're just miserable.
Hmm.
They could try and be hiding it, and most people can see right through it. And the reason you can see right through it is because they're giving it off in their energy. It's just they're obviously miserable. Hatred will make you that way, even if you don't realize it, even if you're having fun with it, even if it's just a joke. Don't allow hatred to fester within you because it will destroy you psychically. That's my biggest takeaway from it, as somebody who is an empath, who experiences it in other people all the time, you can always tell when somebody is just full of actual venomous hatred. And you have to stay away from those people and don't let yourself become one.
Sweet. Very nice. That was almost namaste-ish. But, model?
Yeah, just kind of add to what you're talking about. The problem with religion now is a man-made thing. It's not the religions. It's just this, like you say, it's this just constantly sucking the joy out of everything. And there are, the first line in the Dhammapada is, "You are what you think."
Yep.
And there's another proverb that is, "If you want to be happy, be." And I think that's just just be happy. If you want to be happy, then you have to do it.
Here's what I always tell people: happiness is a choice. Decide.
And it also takes practice not to worry yourself to death, because you have to get that you actually mind over matter, and you have to train yourself to understand that um, not worrying about stuff is not the same thing as indifference. And worrying, it solves nothing.
Hmm.
It's just an emotion. So you sit around and worry about not having enough money, or worrying about the coronavirus or whatever it is. You're not doing anything to help yourself. You're not dealing with the issues.
True. Fair point.
Be happy
Be happy.
and stay busy. You can't watch Netflix all night long. You can't play video games for 15 hours, Pope Raven.
Booster.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't
Be productive.
be happy. You can't be happy doing that stuff, because there's no accomplishment.
Yeah,
True.
be productive. Do something.
Yeah,
Even if it's the small things, I mean, go out, clean, um, go visit people that might need it. Go get a job and work. Work 2 jobs if you have the latitude.
eat some crayons. Do
Yeah,
something.
go travel. Draw some stuff. Do something, as opposed to just sit there like a carbuncle on a couch.
Ooh, carbuncles. Slick Jimmy's throwing around the vocabulary today, Thundero.
He's been this thesaurus, I see.
I know, it's wonderful.
Well, I was one of those weird kids that used to read the dictionary and the
I know.
thesaurus for fun.
Yes,
Yeah,
me too. we nerds have united. All right, let me come over here and read the chat, and then we'll make a decision what we're going to do next week. Let me see here. Argos Creations Bill, of course, says Booster is a heretic. Well, that's the most legible thing I've heard people say all week. Booster says, I'm listening to Joe Rogan now. W2TF. Well, dude, there's a lot more to that fella than you initially meets the eye, actually. No space.
At least it wasn't Stefan Molyneux.
Well, that's true. No safe is no place. No space is a safe place if Booster is there. Okay, all right. Thank you, Fanspeak. You have inspired me to shoot up heroin. All right. This week on DNQFE, Tripping Balls episode. Watch our artist draw on a bad trip. Dude, bad trips are no joke, man. This explains a lot, model.
Bad trip is still a good trip, though.
I've seen a couple of bad ones, dude. It's quite wild. But anyway, I won't get into that. Sheldon Martin says, your brain releases DMT in sleep, right? Yes, it does. I think I read that somewhere. Hopefully not a meme. No, it does, actually. And that's what those actual government experimentations went into. And it's very interesting that these shamanistic natives had figured something like that out to understand that the brain, and of course the pineal gland is what's releasing it, which brings us back to that. We could have a whole damn show on the pineal gland because
in my understanding of that too, and people should know this, is that is finite. That thing can't keep cracking out serotonin and DMT and stuff like that. So if you're clouding it up with these artificial medications, that's why you don't want to eat acid every day.
No, God no.
Or mushrooms or anything like that, because that is one of the, you can't just produce infinite amounts of the drugs that make you happy.
Yeah, but I mean, I
You-
think it's true, and that's of course addiction and the destructive aspect of it. But it is interesting to me, though, model going to what you had said in the fact that how did these ancients figure that out, man? Because that's pretty locked in to what it is to be human, actually. But
Mhm.
good point, Sheldon. Let's see here. We have the Bunderdome in here, which is an awesome name. Uh, Eric says, "Easy. You ain't doing it right then." I think he's commenting on my sex comments. Uh, Bill says character development used to be part of the Western primary school education. Dude, there's a lot of stuff they don't bother to teach in schools anymore. Why don't they teach kids how to socially interact with people? Why don't they have etiquette classes anymore? Why don't they teach
Why
basic
don't,
economics, for goodness sake, dude?
how about just basic stoicism, the foundation of
Yeah.
our entire
Oh God,
civilization? It's
most certainly
Aristotelian
should be teaching.
stoicism.
I agree 100%. Stoicism should be a mandatory thing in every school, right?
Yes.
I
Ethics and morals. My God. I
Yeah,
mean, we're
yeah,
really lacking in that
yeah.
stuff.
Let's see. Roger wishes everyone a good week, as he always does, which is awesome. Thank you very much. Booster wants Model to shut up for some reason. And Sheldon tells Model, stop controlling my life. You pissed off some of the nerds. I don't know what you did. But
That's all right. They
it's
deserve
okay.
it.
Yeah. Curious 2A says the obake is a knife based on a traditional Japanese knife. Okay, thank you. See, Thundero says sexually. I don't know what's going on. You guys are. It sounds like a dare model. All right, fine. I've caught up with the chat. All right, so let's see here. I'm going to do the namaste myself today. But before I do that, I would like to make a decision what we're going to talk about next week. Because this week we didn't make a decision until like the last minute, so I chose a subject I knew a lot about. But I prefer to have time to actually do the research necessary for the conversation. So, what would we like to talk about next week, guys?
I would like to do the actual Philadelphia and Montauk experiment. The time and the oh, there's time travel elements. There's also antimatter, which is really cool.
Well, yeah, that's true. Have we covered time travel on the show?
Yeah, we have.
We have.
Um, we have broadly though. We didn't. I'm pretty sure we mentioned both Philadelphia and Montauk. We could go deep. Those are big ones. Very big ones.
Well, maybe we could title it governmental experimentation.
No, just do Montauk. Yeah, because you go too broad, you never get to just get that one thing. That'll take up a whole show.
Okay. Well, for me, no, you're right. We didn't get so deep into Montauk because although the remote viewing and stuff came out of that, a lot of the Montauk was part of the Manchurian Candidate aspect, right? Which is a
No, no,
different.
no, no. It's not that at all.
Well, it's part of
No,
it though.
I mean they had like people stuck inside the decks and the bulkheads
Oh,
of
and
ship.
the Philadelphia experiment. Yeah, sure. But and that's okay. Okay, Slick, what do you think?
That's an actual conspiracy.
It
I
is. It is. Yeah.
I don't have. I probably anything I would suggest has probably been already done.
Do you
So
do you think Montauk covers Philadelphia experiment enough though?
me?
No,
Well, they're
model.
two different things.
They
Okay.
are. That's
Philadelphia
what I mean.
and
Yeah.
Montauk are but they are tied together because they claim to have opened a gate in between them.
Yeah. No. No. I know the whole thing layout of the Philadelphia experiment. But you sure you don't want to call it governmental experimentations? I mean, that might just kind of cover it.
I would be down with that.
Yeah. Because that way we could talk about both of them. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah, Montauk, Philadelphia experiment next week.
Government black projects.
Government, oh, I like that better, Slick. Thank you. But and of course that could also bring up conversations about the Nazi bell and yeah, I
Mhm.
think that'll be fun. That'll be fun. All right then. Very good. Well, thank you guys all for coming here and joining us. Thank you to my panel, which I always appreciate you guys coming in. We have great conversations here. This is so much fun. But my namaste is this: um, just every day when you wake up, stand up and move forward, and life will work itself out.
Amen.
Amen. Namaste.
I can do it.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Later.